All right, I'll kick us off. Welcome, everyone. I'm Annie Boggs from Indigo River. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're excited to present a bit on what we've been working on the last couple months. We really appreciate your attendance and participation as we work to finalize our harbor strategic plan recommendations. Amelia had circulated some of our draft deliverables to you in advance of this call, so we're looking forward to any feedback. We also wanted to note we did receive the feedback from Miss Jones via email earlier today, and we'll be looking into what she sent further following this call. I know it's tied to our street ends work. Wanting to provide a status update since we last met. This spring, we continue to host focus groups and interviews of harbor users and businesses. We obtained some really great feedback. In June, we attended a site visit to tour street ends with the help of Chris McDonnell. We really appreciate his time and insight. He took us to pretty much all of the street ends identified in the grant application that's funding the street ends work. So just a shout out to him and the time he offered us in June.
That was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Um, And then this summer, the HRNA team, they led the development of the harbor management strategy, which they will present on today. We also prepared a mooring study. Shay Thorvaldson is here to present on that today. And we just really wanted to reiterate, we appreciate your feedback as we finalize these deliverables. They are still in draft form, so we'll definitely incorporate any feedback you provide. First thing we wanted to present on is the street ends study. The goal here for the street ends is to expand equitable, sustainable public access to the Norwalk Harbor. These street ends are underutilized, publicly owned space. The image on the right is a very zoomed out map showing all the potential street end options that were identified in the grant application. Many of these are unclearly marked. They have overgrown vegetation, but they have high potential to be used as different programming uses or access points to the water. There are some risks we identify. These include flooding, the presence of invasive species, ecological sensitivity, and also ensuring that there's adequate space on neighborhood streets to allow access. Overall, we definitely think there's lots of opportunity and the prospect of transforming these overlooked street ends into community assets for recreation, education, and resilience is something we're really excited about. So there were 21 street ends identified and 19 within the harbor study area that we studied more in detail. We attempted to balance the geographic scope so that not all of our recommended options were in one specific area. We also looked at ecological constraints, opportunities, and community benefits. So the criteria we used focused on the environmental opportunity, the infrastructure potential, feasibility and legal clarity, and equity and community benefit. We looked at whether the street ends were located in Connecticut environmental justice areas. And based on this criteria, we recommended 5 sites to advance for further development. I know this is really hard to see, but we just wanted to put this on the screen quickly to show our matrix. We focused on looking at existing conditions based on our site visit. Unsurprisingly, many of these are in the FEMA flood zone. They have some erosion risk. There's a lot of critical habitat, wetland, and tidal flat presence. And we also looked at social vulnerability. With Shay's help, who prepared the mooring plan, we looked into which street ends had sufficient water depth to provide easier water access and which were adequate for things such as boat launches and storage.
Could you show us the five that you had selected? Just see, we can't really see that.
Oh, so that will be touched on later. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
Weeks will be taken over to present the 5 options more in detail. And just some general observations. Many are physically reachable but lack adequate signage and safe pathways. There's some connectivity opportunities connecting the street ends with the Harbor Loop Trail. As I said, many of them overlap with tidal wetlands, intertidal flats, and other sensitive habitat areas, so we kept that into consideration. And the community context is really important. Some of the sites are in environmental justice block groups, so there's potential to address disparities in water access and even integrate street end activation with local schools and community programs. So I'll pass to Elise for further findings.
Thanks, Annie. So yeah, aside from social vulnerability areas, we mapped out the street and candidates in relation to critical habitat, which included protected open spaces as delineated by CT Deep, habitat deemed critical also by Deep, shellfish, and then the natural diversity database area. We also looked at tidal wetlands and intertidal flats, water depths, and erosion risk to just investigate all the 19 street ends viability. And this may not be visible at this scale, but just noting that the chart of depths in the map on the right is in meters. Yeah, so based on our evaluation of all of these in our matrix, we selected these 5 street end candidates to further explore that I'm going to talk about a little bit. The first is Lowndes Avenue, which falls right on the border of the EJ Block area, and where just an access point would be beneficial for underserved residents. The site is in a pretty sensitive ecological setting near wetlands and intertidal flats, and it had Phragmites, which had already been culled when we visited. But we found opportunity for continued restoration, including restoring the shoreline with native plants and low profile living shoreline stabilization, improving ADA access with compliant paths, and potential for seeding with low overlooks, and then little to no water contact to just avoid disruption to the wetlands. We're also suggesting interpretive signage about these wetlands, or about bird habitat and invasive species, and then to, where possible, engage neighborhood stakeholders to just ensure an inclusive design. The next one is North Street, which is also in an EJ area. This one features largely paved footprints and existing parking with pretty low ecological sensitivity. We found that this site presented an opportunity for a boat launch given the significant water depth, along with public amenities like seating, bike racks, a shade kiosk, and its proximity to the South Norwalk Boat Club also just presents an opportunity for collaboration or some kind of community programming. So our recommendations for this site are to repurpose some of the paved area with ADA paths, seating, permeable surfaces and bioswales, and then to add amenities like the ones I just mentioned, bike racks, maybe trash receptacles, shade structures, low glare lighting, and this will require evidently some coordination with both the boat club and the neighbor for just access and buffering. It could be an interesting pilot site for community-driven art programming or education with also public signage and multilingual wayfinding. Next up is First Street.
May I make a comment?
Yeah.
That's Jerry Tony. With regard to North Street, we can go back to that. What is the width or the span with which you're speaking for accessibility? It's a very wide area at the end of the street. I'm familiar with the boat club area, but is it just the width of the street coming down north, whatever, 22 feet or something? Or is the entire span? What is the footprint you're talking about for accessibility?
That'll depend on what we end up envisioning, I guess, for the design.
I think it was just the end portion that we were thinking about.
So Jerry, the city right of way is 50 feet wide there. It's basically from that's the city right of way. It runs basically from the wall that runs the full length of North Street to, including sidewalk and pavement that's what the city owns. So everything north of that is, well, there's a side street there, but also there's a large triangular piece that is actually owned by the boat club for their parking, although the parking has been striped into the city right of way. So, it's a 50-foot strip that the city owns. And that's what we can concentrate our efforts on.
That's my question. Thanks, Chris.
Yep, sure, guys.
Great, thank you. Next up is First Streets. This site is relatively accessible already because it's along the Harbor Loop Trail. It's in the city center, and it features a grassy area along with a pretty steep drop to the water. There's some phragmites here as well, and so our recommendations for this site are to remove said phragmites and to stabilize the shoreline by replanting with salt-tolerant natives, as well as providing an ADA compliant access path to the overlook, either boardwalk or gravel paths, installing benches and maybe interpretive signage on here maybe marsh ecology and shoreline resilience. And then lastly, there is potential for a low impact kayak pullout area. The next street end is Third Street, which features a paved end with parking, another steep slope to the water, and it's adjacent to Cops Island oysters. It's technically within the natural diversity database boundary, but it's not highly sensitive. And here public access is currently somewhat unclear and visually ambiguous, but it has the advantage of being well suited for a kayak boat launch, and it has a strong cultural link to the oyster industry and the working waterfront. So our recommendations are to develop more formally this kayak launch area with an ADA compliant path and maybe a modular ramp system, to stabilize the slope with native vegetation and living shoreline treatments, to manage any runoff with bioswales or vegetative filter strip, and adding signage on Norwalk's oyster industry and just harbor industry, and exploring possible partnerships with Cops Island oysters for maybe educational programming. Lastly,
this one, we chose as a candidate due to the adequate water depths, but it'll definitely require some, additional coordination to make it work. Just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and before you move off of that slide in that area, I'm curious if you have any sense of whether it's currently used as a kayak launch, or that's just the expectation if you build it.
We're not 100% sure if that's how it's currently being used, but that's we kind of want to, for the public, have it an understood, point of access for the water, because currently it's a little unclear. I think it's the upland portion, of course, appears to be used for parking, and then right adjacent is the Cops Island business.
Right.
Did you take into account their use of the water? They have a lot of boats that go in and out of there, on and off throughout the day. It's a pretty busy space.
Mm-hmm.
We did. It's not necessarily the best spot for human powered stuff, but it does combine pretty well with their waterfront dependent use already. So from a regulatory standpoint, it's good. We actually run a kayak launch and community program out of a very busy marina. When there are strategies to work around it and just deal with it. Now, that would be looking.
Is there a what is currently used as a kayak launch in that part of the city, if anything?
We've gotten no feedback from any citizens or inputs or anything as to where and what people are using as non-official kayak launches. In my experience, people are jumping fences or crawling down embankments.
So I guess no one got back to you about Vets Park or Calf Pasture Beach?
No, that's, we know that they're using them because we have aerial and we have, anecdotal, photos and things like that. But
we actually have kayak racks, and we actually store kayaks there in day lots from Shady Beach and Calf Pasture.
I'm sorry, where?
Calf Pasture Beach and Shady Beach.
Okay, yeah, that was one of the bits of information that was not exactly forthcoming from a lot of the outreach that we did. Annie, right? We didn't get anything talking about human power. Boating, unfortunately. So, But we're cognizant of it in the studies here.
I mean, just living on the harbor, being able to look out and see some of the areas you were just talking about on my window. But I mean, an unofficial guess, I'd say probably 50% of the kayak use in the harbor area is actually from these public spots, and about 50% is more from local people that have a dock or have a friend that has a dock or things like that. I mean, just my general response from seeing paddle. I mean, we probably see 50-50, kayakers versus other, paddle boards, things like that. So
Yeah, and that's why it remains center for human power here on the street end. To make safe access and clear access to make it more convenient.
yeah, I mean, I guess that was part of my comment about First and Second Street seem to be absolute home runs. Nor, some of the spots on the other side over by South Narra Boat Club and others. I was just a little concerned about, having people with paddle boards or kayaks in the area where Norman's bringing, multiple boats. But I'm assuming you probably talked to him as one of the folks that you kind of interviewed as part of this.
We have, yep, he's one of our stakeholders.
Okay.
All right, so I guess I'll just move on to the last one. So Cove Avenue is a paved street end in a more residential area with existing parking. The street is also, it's relatively wide, which could allow for a little bit more programming without affecting neighbors too much. There are mud flats and seagrass present, which implies that this would need a relatively low impact design, but it's also a feasible location for a kayak launch. So our recommendations for this site are to develop a launch spot for kayaks and canoes, to add an ADA compliance pervious access path close to the water's edge, install benches and low profile signage to just indicate public access, and generally to avoid hardened areas, hardened surfaces here to protect the shoreline ecology. So as Annie mentioned, the 5 sites together present a balance of just geographical coverage and equity benefits, ecological restoration, recreation access, and practical feasibility. And finally, we have a set of general recommendations for all of the street ends that we looked at embedded in the study, just so a framework that includes steps like confirming right-of-ways at each site, providing consistent signage and ADA access, some amenities, and ecological resilience. And then suggesting efforts like adopt a site programs or youth-led art and education. And then lastly, of course, is pursuing grant funding, which will enable the realization of these projects through just like site planning and design. So next steps might involve looking further at Connecticut Port Authority funding, CT Deep, and NOAA funds. Otherwise, I think I'll hand it over to Shay for the next section on mooring.
Well, before we move from the street ends, you want to open it up?
Yeah, let's open it up. And also this picture at the right is a kind of an example street end that Chris showed us south of the Norwalk Harbor that kind of serves as inspiration for us.
I'll ask one question going back to the slide. Well, was it 3rd Street? There you go. Oh no, 1st Street with sorry, no, 3rd.
3rd.
Yep, alongside Norm's operation. You mentioned Dick Harris was supposed to be on this call. Have you actually spoken to Norm about this? Does he feel it would?
We've spoken to Norm about many elements of our study. We haven't. We've only shared this street end study with Amelia and Steve and the steering committee. So we wanted to kind of get your thoughts first. This is obviously in draft form, and we plan to talk with further folks, including Norm and his team. This is not set in stone. It's just kind of our findings from looking at initial observations.
Right. I think it would be imperative that you get his perspective on this, make sure that it won't interfere with his operations, or he feels that his operations would pose a significant hazard for kayakers.
Okay, thank you.
Alan, go ahead if you have a question.
Yeah, just the obvious question, I guess, is, you know, have we researched the demand for kayak launches and things like this? Is it a thought of if we build it, will they come? You know, that's the question I have. I think it's a wonderful plan. I think it's you know, terrific, and the more access we can provide, the better. The only question I have is whether there are citizens that would make use of it if we provide those things. And I guess that's just the kind of logistical question before we get too excited about it. Just, I think it's terrific, but I what I can't predict is would these places be actually be utilized, especially make the investment.
We did hear the need for increased access, including kayak access as part of our community outreach. It's just qualitative, of course, but I think increasing water access points, including for kayaks, was something we heard.
I would think Robert could comment on this. How many applications do you get, Robert, versus spaces down the beach? Don't mean to dump on you here. I thought Robert from Parks and Rec was here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
We have 100 kayak storage, and we get probably about 150 to 200 applications, and then we do a lottery.
That's it.
Yeah.
Good indication right there.
Not a scientific study, but gives you an idea what's going on. Thanks, Robert.
Chris, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I was sort of wanted to follow up on that because I think one of the original ideas we had, both for excuse me, kayak and stand-up paddle boards, as well as to access the mooring field, people keeping dinghies that they could. The only place currently to be able to use a dinghy is on the Vets Park, the East Vets Park dock, which is under construction now. And that's good for the North Anchorage, but for the South Anchorage, it's really, really far for anybody who doesn't have a motorized dinghy. If you just want to be able to roll out, it's not really practical now. And so I don't know if you mentioned that about boat storage racks, like typical, you know, what the kind of racks that are already provided at Calf Pasture and Shady Beach, but at places further up the harbor. So I'd like to see that included.
Okay.
One of the reasons why the street ends were limited to what they picked is because of water depth. We specifically eliminated those where you couldn't actually drag a dinghy out or actually get in a dinghy or even potentially have a low profile.
Sure. I mean, the west side of the harbor has, you know, pretty extensive mud flats at low tide.
Yeah.
The ones that were identified, like you said, they, you know, have a gravel slope to the low tide point. But yeah.
My experience with dinghy racks and dinghies is that they, you know, unmanaged dinghy racks become an absolute nightmare after a period of time in terms of boats that have just been left there, dinghies that are left after the season, junk boats just sitting on racks because people leave them there. So there is a balance between giving access and also having, you know, a management component of that at the street end, such that it could be kept neat and clean and orderly. And obviously Parks and Rec would have a part of that. It's city-owned property in terms of racks and permits.
Sure, it will be depend on how much they want, what kind of management they want to put into that.
Yeah,
you know, forcing people to remove it in the winter or dumpstering the ones that aren't removed.
Yeah, and we've utilized on the South Shore Line, we've converted from racks to actually vertical storage, where you know you tip them on end if they're rowboats or stacking storage that's been able to do that. So there are some definite opportunities there for that, especially.
Just for your information, my inspiration for this was the streets just north of downtown in Newport, Rhode Island, where there's a pretty large mooring field there. And
I used to live there on those streets.
Okay, see? I forget the names now. They're like trees or nuts or something. But anyways, yes, and so there's pretty big kayak. I mean, Newport is very much a boat-oriented town, and that is a pretty extensive mooring field. And there's racks on the street that have probably hold 20, 30 each. So that's what I would love to see for our town if we can manage it. But it is
I used to roll my sailboat down the creek there to go sailing from the house itself. So yeah, I get that.
Okay.
Can residents launch a kayak and or a paddleboard from Vets Park docks?
There's nothing preventing them from a
Okay.
logistical standpoint, but that's a parks department.
Yeah. Well, the dock on the east side is locked. So unless you are already a dinghy.
No, I meant the ramps, the boat ramps.
The ramps. I don't know if that's how that's regulated.
One advantage of structuring it the way that the team structured it is, and at least kind of hinted at it, was the grant opportunities that follow. So typically the process would work is you kind of laid out a conceptual idea of what could be possible in one of these locations, and then you would seek the second round of funding to actually develop plans. And to Alan's point about, is there demand for kayaks or not demands, you could come up with 3 or 4 scenarios for each one of these street ends and then put that out for public comment to get everybody's thoughts on it. And then you refine the plan from there. And then you could further seek funding to actually do the construction implementation, with the idea being that it's less city operating or capital funds that go into the developments and implementations of the plan. So it's a good way to structure it, because oftentimes grants want to know that this is not just like a fly by night or seat of the pants thought that the city had, but it's something that they've been thinking about and have already put funds into to kind of think through.
I would just add that got some connectivity issues here. That also with access to the mooring field and storage of a dinghy at any of these locations, parking becomes an issue as well, because our harbor moorings are not limited to Norwalk residents. They can be anybody that rents a mooring space in the harbor for the season. And so the problem we often are confronted with is where is the access to that, and that means where do you keep a dinghy and where do you park your car? So that's all goes with it. As you add the dinghy, then you add the vehicle. So that's just another piece of the puzzle in thinking about this.
Yeah, we understand that, and I think street width was part of our criteria, not wanting to choose streets that were too narrow. And we understand that definitely additional neighborhood coordination would have to occur before, any additional grant funding is sought for these options, because I'm sure the neighborhood members will have some thoughts.
I think one of the things that I live in Amityville on the water, where they did the street ends like this for resiliency, and a lot of people use kayaking and park on the street ends now as well. I live across from a street end that they use as a kayak launch, where they have to climb up the bulkhead. I think from the idea of resident versus non-resident also ties into the mooring field and the ideas that we'll talk about shortly about water taxi and cleaner, easier, more efficient access. We want to try to avoid, non-residents from parking in the neighborhoods where it suits neighborhoods, and have them focus more necessarily on larger parking areas where they can access. The problem right now is they access, again, like you said, the South Mooring field, it's accessed by dinghy is a little bit difficult. So when you combine the street ends with the mooring study and the potential for access of moorings, it sort of becomes a bigger package combined together that could be looked at strategically.
Yeah, I think they work well together.
And did you guys look at any other locations, just in terms of when you picked the 5 that were farther out?
Oh yeah.
So that we could, really, ideally, and this is, to dovetail on what Alan was talking about, is, create more. And Jeff Mangles has done an amazing job, getting the mooring program up and running and getting the DOCWA involved, and it's been great. And seeing the new moorings out by Sheffield and in the outer harbor. It's tremendous, and they're, you know, the need is going to be there. It already is, but I mean, the background on it is going to be great. So, you know, accessing those with the dinghy, as Chris and a couple others had mentioned, is just nearly impossible, which is the challenge.
The east side is notorious for really bad mudflats. So a lot of the sites that were identified as Elix are showing the map there on the east side, and even further down towards Wilson Point and Wilson Cove, you get a lot more shallow, a lot quicker. Plus, you have a much lower density, a much higher value property area, and there's a lot fewer street ends that are actually owned and usable. So while we did look at the east side, it was relatively early not killed, but you know, the scoring went down pretty quickly because of ease of water depths at really low tide. That being said, we would love to have something down that way. You could see it's a big blank area, and Manresa Island being the independent agency now that is Manresa Island, that becomes the #1 potential, you know, water dependent use down there, because it does tie the middle of the harbor and the outer islands closer towards the city, and the upper harbor. So that's why, you know, that becomes a very key component of discussions here.
Okay. I may pass it to you, Shay, just in the interest of time to kick off the
Sure.
mooring
So
discussion.
just a little background on me. I grew up on the South Shore of Long Island, where my entire life I've had access to the outer islands and the Barrier Islands of Fire Island. So I looked at this as kind of how I grew up: clamming, fishing, taking the boat out when I was 10 and flipping it over by Fire Island. And so, but I also grew up seeing the impacts of ease of access to the outer islands, most notably some of the barrier islands that have been overrun and too much housing. So we're going to talk about a little bit of a balance here. Part of that balance is I went in and actually went through 100 years, then 50 years, and then I did it almost year by year for historic aerials to find out where everybody utilized, where everybody wanted to anchor, and where everybody wanted to be in the harbor. And that's really where the first map came out. We call it historic mooring areas. Some of them are active mooring areas. Some of them, if you look at a satellite at any one day, you might not see any boats there. But they tend to be fleeting and mooring areas where people head out to the beaches. They get 20 or 30 boats moored up outside of a beach or one of the outer islands in good water depth. And these are places that people have already demonstrated that they want to utilize and want to get to. We then took the next step, and you know, we looked at how those areas, how congested where they were, what the water depths were, presence of SAV, you know, mud flats, any environmental consideration that the addition of moorings might adversely affect it, or the other way around is if you put moorings in and boats don't have to anchor all the time and they could just hook to a mooring, if there's advantages to having moorings at these locations, because anchors in general are worse than moorings once they're set once, provided the moorings aren't moved every year. You know, and then the added part to that is, how do you get to these spots? If people are mooring there over a season, say someone wanted to moor out in the outer islands and they wanted to leave their boat there all season because of its convenience, how do they get there? But that also ties into the discussion on the south moorings up in the upper harbor, and the harbor it is a bit of a stretch to row your boat out there if you don't have you know, a small motor. And so the two sort of combined: easier access to the southern moorings, easier access to the entire set of islands, and then being able to expand that so that, you know, people can get to where they want to go safely, environmentally friendly, with which boating is not a minor statement, and tie that into the potential for Manresa Island to be sort of a hub as well. That is not, unfortunately, we don't have control over those discussions, but it's something that can't be avoided in the discussion. Go ahead, Elise. So As you guys are all harbor steering guys, you generally know boats, water depth, seabed type, wind wave, and current. Prevailing wind wave and current in Norfolk Harbor, everybody knows it can go both ways. You have this wonderful channel that runs through and cuts through the Middle Islands. And having sailed a 7-foot depth sailboat out through there, it gets a little squirrely when you're racing at 10 knots and you want to avoid all those shoals. So, you know, the water depth becomes a very key point. For two reasons. One, also the shallow water depths, what we call the littoral zone, also generally are more amenable to habitat. The deeper you get, while you have habitat, it's a little less in. The seabed type, of course, as everybody knows, while there are advances in moorings and advances and things like that, every hurricane season, at least one mooring pulls. I don't know what the record is in Newark Harbor, but when I was the fleet manager at Nyack Boat Club, we had 200 some odd moorings that were self-set. And of those 200, inevitably 2 to 3 every year pulled. So there is a consideration for a very clear planning as to what types of seabed and what types of moorings are going to be there. And then, of course, the wind and prevailing current. So we looked at how we looked at the lee of islands, how you had traffic, whether you were in major current areas, if there were any tidal eddies, as there are a couple where the rivers combine, and ease the mooring for that to make it safe. Next. Density of boats is an automatic. In the current mooring fields, there are double and triple moorings we talk about. You know, there's single point, which are a large swing, and double point, which reduce the swing. So the density of boats, whether we could pack them tighter, whether we wanted them looser, and if there were additional types of moorings that could be implemented, like at in Glen Head or in Glen Island over in Westchester, they have floating docks, entire floating docks moored that boats just moor up to. It's a different type of mooring, but it increases the density and potential for people to be there. The environmental regulations noted, budget capacity, of course. Moorings generally are not cheap. We'd like to think they are, but when you start talking about 200-300 moorings and pop, it adds up. Access, of course. The amenities is, where are people going? Where do they want to moor? Do they want to moor at just the beach and get off and walk in? Do they want to moor near shell fishing grounds where they can go clamming? Or do they want to moor where they're fishing? Alternatively, do they want to moor much closer to the city where they have their house or their shopping, or whether they put a dinghy in, we talked about. And then last but not least, we have to look at, as always, is in a municipality that is limited by manpower. Sometimes in parks, we'll always say that, you know, manpower is limited. You put a lot of moorings in. Which ones are maintained privately? Which ones are maintained publicly? The cost for them, and the cost for, you know, implementing them, inspecting them, and making sure that whatever's in the water is safe. Next. So we looked at, you know, a lot of areas. I mean, we went through the whole harbor. I took my Parker out there and really ran through it. And you know, I know from my standpoint, something from a 6 to 12 foot draft depth when you're talking about sailboats coming into race. So if you get someone coming in all the way in from Newport coming in with an 8-foot draft, 52-foot racing boat, very limited. But when you talk about a Parker that's 18 inches in depth, you've got a much more wide range. So what we tried to look at is the ability of deeper draft potential to be closer to the, you know, the sailing clubs and those ones that, you know, sort of cater to that clientele. Whereas the normal power boaters, even like a 35 Cabo, you know, only draws 3.5 feet. So you've got a bit more flexibility. You're not necessarily going to moor a deep draft sailboat on the outer islands, because most deep draft sailboats have, you know, more considerations. They want to be close to the city. So we looked at all that. But Manresa Island Basin, first one that comes up, of course. It's got the access, it's got the water depth, it's protected, but it is part of their study. And, you know, the opportunity there presents something for them. But immediately outboard of Manresa Island as well, on the west side, there is a good stretch outboard of the southern channel that comes in from the west, there is some good water depth and good bottom conditions outside of Manresa that's not controlled by Manresa that would tie into Manresa. We'll show you the diagrams after. Gregory Point, of course, between Navigate Channel and Peach Island. Not as good a water depth, but it is pretty good depth. Calf Pasture Beach, of course, which everybody knows about. And then, of course, the Norwalk Islands, which are the focus. It was actually easiest to detail out the Norwalk Islands because there's a very common set of areas that people moor out all the time, just running out on their own creation. Go ahead and flip up. So Manresa, we didn't specifically look at and talk about the basin at Manresa because it's deep draft and it's going to be part of the programming. But that mooring field outboard of it, once they've programmed Manresa, we believe is going to be a very big strategic area. It becomes when Manresa is done and for the east side, or sorry, for the west side of the harbor, that becomes a pretty good access area. There's good water depth, a good amount of area, easy access to the channel. And it does, while it is a bit exposed, it does have some, from the east, it does have some shoals in front of it, and some of the islands do present some calmer waters there that can be dealt with. It is the biggest area that we've identified other than the current mooring fields there simply by water depth. And it could be expanded a little bit further if we really chose to get a little bit deeper and a little bit up towards, if you look up towards, was that Harbor View and the island across there, you cross the 3-foot curve and it gets to be about 2 foot at 1 foot, but smaller boats could creep up into that area. So there is room for future expansion on that mooring field to the north. And maybe as sea level rises or we look at tides, the street ends there as well could potentially be utilized, depending on water. Calf Pasture Gregory Point. This is an extension of the existing fields. We looked at what you had in the existing fields and what other specific areas. At the areas located and shown right there really cater more towards the water depth and the clubs that are right there, the yacht clubs. Having moored or anchored in those spots myself with my racing boat, I know those are available spots. A little bit unsheltered, certainly the southern triangle that you see on the Calf Pasture, but in good conditions. Those are definitely viable. There's not a huge amount of space, so we'd be looking at a different type of density ring, not a single point mooring, not necessarily a double point, but maybe more of a floating dock style mooring. And then the Norwalk Islands, which present the biggest opportunity. These 3 spots are the deepest and the most utilized. If you do a boat count year after year, on an average weekend, you're going to see 100 boats, and I think everybody realizes that 100 boats anchored. Private anchoring rips up the beds. It disturbs habitats, and if these areas are really utilized that well, separate from the fact that it's pretty far out, you're not going to row your dinghy. But these, moorings here from an environmental standpoint present them a good opportunity to improve the ecological area over there, provide simplicity of mooring. It won't prevent people from, with an 18-inch draft boat, pulling all the way up to the beach, throwing their anchor on the beach, but it'll prevent some of that, and it'll induce, maybe there is a opportunity on those offshore islands to put racks or Parks Department racks where they could have their own dinghy that they leave out on the islands if they frequent the offshore islands for a lot. We have a spot on South Shore on Barrett Beach where they did that. They had a dinghy rack where summer people who wanted to come in but not pull up on the beach would moor out there. They'd use their own dinghy for the summer, and then when they were done for the summer, they would throw their dinghy on the big boat, take off, and be done. So I think that's a very definite opportunity right there. Go ahead. Okay. Before I get into financial updates, do you want to flip back to that and open it up to see if anybody has any comments or insights or feedback on these potential new spots? Okay, no hands raised. All right, so then we'll go into it.
let me
As I said,
just stick my.
go ahead, Alan. Yeah.
Say a little something. You know, the islands out there are, in many ways, underutilized, tremendous resource of the city of Norwalk, and I think there's a much bigger discussion to go on about how they're utilized. You know, we have city campsites on those islands. We had a scout project this past summer for an Eagle Scout. Really restored a number of the campsites. I think put a new door on the outhouse and things of that nature to make it more presentable. But all of those spaces are really tremendous assets that aren't explored by the city, in my view. And again, I like to camp out and I like to be out on my boat and I like to just drop the hook somewhere and spend the night. I don't know if there's a lot of other people that do that too, but that's my take on it. But all these island anchorages are terrific. And if they were coordinated with the campsite locations, so you have a place to come from, not necessarily from Norwalk, even, but come down the Sound or come from Stamford, and you can rent a campsite in advance. You have to have it has to be support from the community in terms of taking the trash away and maintaining the general order of it. But I think a lot of that can manage itself if you number the campsites and you have moorings and tell people our experience with DACWA is you tell them where the mooring is and what the number on it is that you're going to have, and that all works pretty well. But again, I think that build demand for use of our islands, which I just think is a good thing for our community to have more people coming down. They could run in for dinner in town with the dink. So there's some opportunities there, but be aware of the campsite locations that we have because that's
we have them mapped out.
Having a mooring that goes with them and a nice trip. The only other thing I would say that my just having boated past those islands forever is that there's a lot of utilization on the weekends and day trippers, but not a whole lot of vessels there that spend the night. There's a few in there, but it's not like there's a big traffic. So that's my 2 cents.
No, I think that's definitely, I think you might be able to give them the opportunity to stay the night, camp at the beach. And I think Gary's got his hand up and then Robert. Gary, you're on mute.
There you go.
Okay.
I agree with Alan 100%. There should be a mooring for every campsite. And the campsites are certainly underutilized. The to have a massive number of moorings inside the islands, there's a lot of shellfish beds. Some are privately owned. Others are leased from the state or from the city, but that would have to be explored because you can't put moorings on private property or leased beds. And then the biggest thing I think is the overnight stays. Like Alan said, very few people spend the night out there, and I'm not sure we want to encourage boats spending the night inside the islands. I know DEEP has issues with the sanitation devices on boats and in mooring fields, and adversely impacting the shellfish beds. And that's a whole nother bailiwick that would be interesting to get into, but I just want to throw that out there. That's it.
Yeah, and we looked at, in addition to look at water taxi, we also looked at the need for additional pump out boats, the additional grants for sanitation devices and things like that. And I don't disagree with you. Staying overnight there isn't necessarily great because it is fairly exposed and, traffic that is wayward or coming in at speed at night presents some danger and some issues there. I think just to let everybody know, the areas we picked are gross areas. We didn't overlay all of those private and publicly owned shellfish beds and everything like that. The density here is not meant to be large. It's really meant to be, obviously the campgrounds we knew right away, and then some additional moorings that, day moorings or day trip moorings that might be available. They might be off limits overnight or what have you. Robert?
Yeah, the islands can be better utilized. I think from the Parks and Rec viewpoint, we just haven't had access, haven't been able to access the islands to maintain them in the proper way. And also just to manage the campsites. But we're looking forward to doing a better job there, and probably in our capital, we're looking probably to get a boat and try to maintain that area better, and invite more camping on there. But I think it has to be safer, it has to be cleaner, it has to be better managed, and that's our plan. And really the motivation came from this summer, the cleanup that was done by the harbor master Chris McDonald company.
Sure.
And a lot of other folks joined in, and so the incentive to really make that a better experience. And so I'm going to be asking for some stuff in the capital in the fiscal year to get that managed, probably even so we're gonna do a better job in that area. I think there's more opportunity for us all to join in and make that a better experience.
Great. You want to jump to the next? So without it goes without saying, we do a lot of financial studies. So we did a pretty significant study as to the costs here. In the report, there's a lot more detail. And hopefully Robert and the other folks that actually have to pull the money from capital have a chance to look at it. And if they have questions, we can certainly go over it. There's 3 models. It's keeping the current as a permit-based, convert it all to a city managed harbor wide mooring field, like completely harbor managed, which would require a lot more effort and time and people. But it is a job creator and has potential to bring in revenue for the city. And then of course is the revenue model, and then have transient boaters at a higher value. Now there are limitations on what you can charge and things like that. There are some gaps in the regulations in Connecticut that the floating dock moorings actually don't qualify as single point moorings. They qualify as docks. So there are some gaps in the funding or gaps in the regulations that talk about that we could look at with you strategically to do that. We did really look at the fact that if you want to move further out, if you want to use Manresa and you want to use those others, it's something that we took for granted all around, water taxis and ferries. With the street ends implementation, with all the harbor, with all the boat clubs, we definitely saw that as a big part of what could be done here. The water taxi could double or triple as pump out boat, maintenance boat, things like that, whether it's privately run, whether it's publicly run. We do think that opens the gap up to the islands a little better. Whether or not you want the entire public to be able to access the islands, it would make the campsites, school trips and things like that out to the islands, as well as the mooring fields, a bit better and safer and more accessible. We look at, there's a general break-even point that we showed in there, but a partially run mooring field with transient revenue, knowing Norwalk, maybe opening transient revenue to the islands and having the water taxi to induce people to come in transiently and be able to get into the city. We do see that there's a pretty close correlation between cost and revenue that could be offset on, environmental grants and things like that. So if you have additional questions on the financial model, it's probably worth a much deeper conversation to go through our assumptions and our construction costs and some of the maintenance costs that are associated. So, go ahead, Elise.
Yeah, I guess in the interest of time, unless anyone has any, or Chris, is your hand up?
Yeah, not to get into the weeds, but I have all the information on what our current revenue is from the managed fields and from the transient moorings.
If I could feed that into the model, I can spit it back to you.
Sure.
Robert? You had your hand up again, sorry.
Was it?
Robert, you're on mute, just in case.
No, that was all.
Okay, all right. So next slide, and I think, Annie, am I turning over to HRNA?
Yes, now I
Okay.
think we'll use our last 30 or so minutes for the harbor management strategy.
Thank you, Annie and Shay. Hi, this is Arman. I'm a director at HRNA Advisors. We have been partnered with Indigo River on this assignment. Just as a refresher to you, and one of our tasks was to work on a management strategy overview. And as part of this task, we reviewed today's landscape, and we diagnosed the challenges and gaps that we were able to see in the way the management structure has been set, and we looked at potential future pathways to address those set challenges. And the methodology we used for that was to look at the 2009 Harbor Management Plan and the 2021 Industrial Waterfront Stakeholder Notes, as well as some of the interviews that we have conducted as a team. And using these documents, we mapped current roles with respect to the statutory limits, and used also those to identify key management functions. And lastly, we benchmarked peer harbor management models and best practices from other harbors with a focus on New England, but we also went a little beyond New England to other parts of the West Coast when we saw some useful best practices that we thought could be helpful. But overall, our work basically is look at what's happening today, identify challenges and gaps compared to best practices that might be successful elsewhere, and see what models can be useful as future pathways. And there are no recommendations in this. This is currently just an overview of potential pathways. So that's just a reference that we are leaving the city and you with as part of this work. So Annie, next, or Alex, next slide, please. So first, what we're doing with this piece of work is we mapped the key stakeholders who have some kind of role or responsibility with respect to the management of the harbor. And I'm not going to go through the full list, but you know who they are. And I mean, given that you have received this document beforehand, you have all of this already. So I'm not going to read through this slide, but we've listed the stakeholders and tried to give a summary of their role. Again, as we were able to see from the Harbor Management Plan and the 2021 stakeholder notes, and hopefully balancing that way what's in the statute and what's experienced day to day in practice. So can we switch to the next slide? And then this again is a continuation of the key stakeholders. We looked at everyone from so the first slide was more city stakeholders, and then we also looked at obviously CTD, the Army Corps, the Port Authority, and the private entities as well, like marinas, clubs, boat yards, industrial operators who we've interviewed as part of our work. I see Gary, who's here with us, who we interviewed, environmental and educational entities. I see Jason from the Maritime Aquarium, and then also utility owners. So we looked at a wide spectrum of stakeholders here to get a comprehensive picture. Next slide, please. And we looked at those roles and responsibilities and how things are functioning across 10 operational categories. And again, this is an attempt to categorize what a harbor management strategy should consider. And again, this also looked at examples from elsewhere, best practices on harbor management. And those 10 key operational categories our policy and governance, operations, maintenance and security, enforcement and on-water operations, dredging and sediment management, water quality and resilience, land ownership and acquisition, real estate development, revenue management, funding and financing, recreation and public access, and marketing and visitor services. So can we please move to the next slide? And what we do with these operational categories is first create our first summary of current state of roles and responsibilities. Each row is one of those operational functions that I just ran through. And then we look at, for each operational category, who leads and who has other roles and responsibilities. And in the notes column, we put some notes there, again, based on what we heard from our interviews or what we saw in the industrial waterfront notes, to describe what is happening in practice today with those operational functions, observations around constraints, handoffs, role divisions, etc. But just as an example, to show you the level of detail that we went into, again, I'm not going to read through all of it because you have this document, but for policy and governance, as an example, you know, the Harbor Management Commission leads the harbor plan, and the Planning and Zoning Department and the Planning and Zoning Commission are in charge of zoning. The council adopts ordinances. The harbor master is assigned by the state by statute, and then DEEP and Army Corps, they hold in water permitting authority. So this way, we're trying to get the full picture for each operational category, what the roles and responsibilities are. And then the second slide is the second 5 of those functions. But please stop me at any point if you know if any particular one is helpful to get into. But this matrix is supposed to capture the current state of things. Let's keep going then. So the next step in this process then is to identify existing challenges. Oh, is there someone who wants to jump in? Okay. All right, I'll keep going. So this step is again, using these 10 operational categories, we are trying to identify what are potential rooms for improvement, any challenges, any gaps. Are there any functions that seem to be shared by multiple entities and there seems to be unclarity in roles? So we looked for things like that across all 10 functions. And I think it is now worth to spend a bit more time on those 2 slides. Again, this is a set of 2 slides. So for policy and governance, we're seeing, you know, there has to be, there is a need to navigate multiple institutions when it comes to permitting. Data and key performance indicator management seems currently a bit fragmented when it comes to, you know, permits, incidents, dredging status, water quality metrics, which can limit, you know, things like performance management, public reporting, and goal setting when we look at best practices for harbor management. For category number 2, operations, maintenance, and security, we found that, you know, standard operating procedures for public waterfront facilities could be a useful thing to consider, given the current operation seems to be without formal playbooks or checklists. And I think relevant to the street and study, private-public interfaces seem, you know, they're like liability and security concerns when it comes to public circulation and coordination with private marinas and boat yards. For category number 3, enforcement and on-water operations, you know, speed, no wake, and traffic patterns vary by season and user group. It's, you know, not always easy to enforce those things. So, and multiple agencies have roles in this. So could we, you know, think about a unified patrolling or event incident command was something we considered, again, looking at best practices. Number 4, dredging and sediment management. Coordination and funding, again, federal funding cycles and private bird shoaling. No local mechanism currently exists for bundling priorities that are across the harbor to make joint applications for funding cycles with the Army Corps and maybe with states deep. And then the permitting cadence, it again seemed like there's lack of a shared schedule and dredging windows. We also heard that private entities self-dredge to be able to continue their operations. So maybe some improved coordination could be useful here, is what we saw. On resilience and water quality, category number 5, we saw potential need for integrated capital planning. The wastewater treatment plan came up in the 2021 notes as potentially, impacting water quality through their outfalls, tide backflow. There's when in the events of street flooding, how do we address those? Those roles and responsibilities seem to span multiple departments at the moment. So the potential for a unified capital program could be beneficial. And there were some specific issues that were highlighted in those notes, like, discharging hypoxia, legacy pipes still exist. And, monitoring that better would be, again, an improvement. Next slide, please. And land ownership and acquisition, that's again and real estate development together. Those are important functions in some of the harbor management models that we've seen in terms of managing waterfront properties that are publicly owned, and under land ownership and acquisition, there are certain utility and industrial holdings that are important, and they were also important subjects of the industrial land use study, like Water Street was a specific focus area, obviously, for that. And the rail geometry limits access, staging space, and safety buffers connected to the bridge operations and staging. That bridge construction will continue to be a big event on this for the next several years, obviously, and it could affect commercial and recreational users. Street end rights of way, again, is another topic that's connected to the street end study. And then use compatibility. What we mean by that is, again, in our previous presentation, we were talking a little bit about how waterfront development has recently been focused on residential projects mostly, and how does that interact with the other industrial and recreational uses along the water is an important topic. Can there be design and performance standards and buffers was something that we were looking at as a best practice. Again, that was referred to also in the street end study. And when it comes to revenue management and funding and financing, which is an important topic, there is currently limited revenue, as Shay referred to. Mooring fees are capped by statute. Visitor revenues are modest. And can there be a potential for an enterprise approach? Harbor revenues are not ring-fenced currently. It limits corrective maintenance, looking for matching funds and reinvestment. And there are certain harbor management models that have solutions for those issues, as I'll get into in a second. For recreation and public access, there's, again, we talked about this in the street end study, standardized throw routes and indemnification tools at private docks to facilitate public access is an issue that came up. And there's interest in kayaks and stand-up paddle boards, and it can be streamlined, giving access to those. Wayfinding amenities, we talked about them at length, the street end study. And another important function of certain harbors who take proactive measures on this is marketing and visitor services. It's quite important to increase recreational users of harbors, creating a non-fragmented brand of the harbor, who is in charge of that, and also visitor service gaps. Like if I'm a visitor who's visiting the harbor, do I know where to go to? Which organization gives me resources that are introductory and useful? Okay. So we saw that there could be certain changes around that. I'm sorry, is there a question? I heard somebody unmuted. Got it. Okay. The next slide, please. And I think this is where I will be pausing. So as I mentioned, we looked at some governance model options from other harbors, mostly in New England, who could hopefully function as best practices for us. And we have come up with 5 models that have a variety of, they have different strengths and weaknesses, and also some of them are easier to implement than others. So starting from the left to right, we call this tightening the status quo. This is the minimal. This is the closest to what you have currently. And then right next to that, city-run harbor program. That's a model that some cities use. The harbor management is an internal function of a city government. Option C is a strengthened management commission structure, and then functions are handled by different entities through detailed operating agreements that clarify roles and responsibilities. In other places, option number T or the option D, harbor and port authority model is, it's a quasi-public entity that's not a city entity, but it's related to a city. Sometimes, approvals go through city departments, but it's, again, a little bit more strengthened harbor management commission structure. And then option E, that's more on the land side of management of things, nonprofit conservancies or business improvement districts. This is, again, not for a full harbor management structure, but it's a model that is used frequently for managing waterfront assets that are on land. So we added this here as like a potentially useful model to consider. But starting with tightening the status quo, we look at, for each model, we look at what it is. It's small, like a quick description of it. What could it solve, given that list of challenges that we went through, and potential barriers in its implementation, if the city considers moving forward with any of these. So for tightening the status quo, it keeps the current structure but codifies through memorandums of understanding, through shared permits, dredging trackers, annual harbor work plan could be like, an activity that could take place. Certain KPIs, key performance indicators, can be decided, or, standard event SOP, statements of operations. So that's basically, A and C are quite similar, I would say. Whereas, A is a little bit more, it's less codified than C, but A and C are similar. And what could this model solve? For functions where there seems to be multiple entities that you need to navigate, it helps clarify those roles and responsibilities, such as making clear permitting handoffs, data management, KPI tracking, and coordination of events and activities, and creating a bridge between communications and calendar events. This is again, it's the easiest to implement because it doesn't require any new capacity or funding, but it does rely on voluntary follow-up, or follow through. So, the things that the harbor wants to improve, the tracking of that would have to be done again voluntarily. And fee authority tools are unchanged. And again, as I said, option C is quite similar, but it uses more formal operating agreements that are approved by the city council. And these are still advisory for some levers, and effectiveness again depends on disciplined monitoring. For the city-run harbor program, that's a bit more different. You know, the harbor management is staffed under the city as a separate department for waterside operations, water services, dredging and grant coordination, as well as all data KPI monitoring. So this is a little bit better when we look at other examples in terms of enforcement of those different functions. It helps planning better. You know, you can align investments with city's capital planning, and resource sharing could happen with other city departments. But this again relies on new FTEs, equipment, budget, etc. So that's the one downside. Harbor Port Authority option is a quasi-public entity. It again it's structuring a new entity, so it's a very huge undertaking. But again, it helps with more enforced operations and implementation of the different functions. And then the last example, the 501c3 creation for like it's a steward of waterfront entities, or sorry, waterfront assets. That could be useful for some of the issues that we have discussed when it comes to street ends and mooring, like public access, activation, you know, wayfinding, liability management, and also applying for identifying and applying for funding for stewarding waterside assets. So it doesn't fix waterside operational issues, but it's a model that can help with waterside assets. So I spoke a lot. The next two slides will be like what these models can look like across those 10 operational functions, and how, you know, different roles and responsibilities can be distributed. But I won't go through those. You have these slides. So I'll just pause. Can we go back to the previous slide and pause there maybe for any questions or thoughts?
It's a lot of information. We'll give you that.
This will take some time to digest. I think
Yeah.
it's
Of course, yes.
really very thought provoking. Actually, though, it's very good. It should.
Thank you, appreciate that.
So from our standpoint in New York City, we're having the same exact conversations because there seems to be a lot of different agencies running New York City's waterfront. And there's no waterfront czar, so to speak. And it's something that every agency struggles with a little bit. And like, you know, the collective focus to combine everything together in one agency is always strong, but whether that's feasible or not is a different story.
The city of Norwalk has not been focused on its waterfront really for forever. It's been a commercial. We have oystering, and then we had regular, you know, oil and barge deliveries and all those sorts of things for generations here. That's those things are leaving quickly or diminishing in activity, and so I think it's important for the city to be rethinking its utilization of the harbor, and actually for the city itself to be more engaged in that. And I think so that's why we have this this study going on, is to get more engagement and the city to speak about what it really wants to have in its harbor and what it wants to do with it. You know, we have a lot of brilliant resources like our islands and a tremendous amount of protected water compared to other locations, and you need to find a plan for all those things. A 21st century plan too, you know, something that's agrees with where we are, where our citizens are today, where the residents of Connecticut are. one thing I'd put out, I would just point out, you know, I have a mooring in Port Jefferson that I, you know, for weekend use and stuff like that. But you know, there I pay $700 or $800 for a mooring there for the season. Connecticut's mooring fee to the state is capped at $200 in
Yeah.
Connecticut. And I don't know how long it's been that way, but I found in the
Long enough.
in the statute, you know, when I scan printed material, I look for dollar signs and numbers. And in the Connecticut statute, it's all it's in words. It's $200 written out. There's no dollar sign. There's no 200. It's very hard to pick out of the text. But I think as a result of part of this, that should be reviewed too. Again, just because it's a valuable resource to have a mooring spot guaranteed for the season in a pleasant location, and we're below market for the Long Island Sound, I think, in Norwalk.
Oh yeah, very much so. That's why when we looked at the financial model for the water taxi and additional moorings is what other ancillary revenue can be generated. Can you charge for the water taxi? Can you charge for, you know, can you integrate it in like a city-run harbor program where all the moorings are city controlled, including the installation, the sales, and things like that. Whether there could be, you know, skirt around that $200 cap. You know, separate from that, if there was enough of the harbors, whether it's Mamaroneck plus or like Bridgeport plus New Haven plus Norwalk, all going together and providing enough detail and information as to the market and to the benefit of potentially having higher rates, that it won't necessarily eliminate traffic, but that it could feed into a harbor port authority or a local harbor port authority that would collectively make the entire harbor better individually, that some added fees wouldn't be that big of a detriment.
And I appreciate you mentioning the sort of the floating.
Yeah,
dock.
it's a sneaky one because it's
you take-
technically a floating dock, not a mooring, but
Right. And we're familiar with that from Milford has a tremendous number
Yes,
of those.
they
up
do.
at the
Yeah.
river. Right.
Yeah.
And that's something I think the Harbor Commission next year is planning on piloting a single unit like that in our
Oh,
harbor
okay.
to do as a experiment, really, to see.
Yeah.
Particularly where we have vessels anchored bow and stern, it makes or moored bow and stern, it makes a lot of sense.
You're making it a lot nicer. You can put services and garbage on there. You can put garbage cans. You can, you know, there's a bit more maintenance and a bit more cost. But again, that ties into what Ermin is talking about here is, you know, you've got a harbor management plan, you've got a harbor strategic plan here shortly, you've got the steering committee, and you've got other models, collectivizing them together as a single, you know,
Right.
idea of forethought, including in the water taxi and the street ends, all becomes part of the same potential management group collectively.
And the water taxi fits in with the Manresa development as well, again.
Indeed.
So it's all one big happy thing.
Yeah, so maybe they can fund it.
Exactly. That's my thought.
Think we can pull this screen down, you know?
Sorry, what was that?
Maybe we can pull the screen down so, you know.
Oh, yeah, I'll stop
see each
sharing.
other. Yeah.
So that's all we had, Annie, right?
Yep.
So open it up to general discussion now, I think.
Yeah, and I just want to say welcome additional feedback via email if that's easier. And I was taking detailed notes, so really appreciate the feedback you offered during today's meeting on these different deliverables. I might be reaching out to different folks just to clarify certain things. But yeah, we'll be updating our deliverables based on this feedback and any written feedback we receive.
Can we email I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yep, no, go ahead.
If Amelia, we have an email contact so we can funnel our individual comments into to Annie and the group.
Yep.
What's the timing for any follow-up comments?
Just within the next couple of weeks, I think.
Okay, if you had something specific, that would be great.
Hey, Annie, what's our final deadline for actual contractual?
I envision that we would be wrapping up stuff in October.
So then we would ask for everyone to have comments to us. I say October 10th.
I think that
Okay, thank you.
would
Should
work.
give us 3 weeks to complete everything and update anything. Knowing that I'll have to run the model again after Chris gives me some of the funding, revenue and stuff like that. We'll run the model and we'll have a chance to talk. I'll actually see the Oyster guys tonight at Billion Oyster Project party in Brooklyn. They're one of the vendors, so I'll make sure I stop by and talk to them as well.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for your time and
Sorry, Chris, you're muted. We can't hear you. It looks like you're talking, but we can't hear you, Chris.
I think he was talking to someone specifically.
Oh, sorry. Well, before we adjourn, I will just say there is a public participation item on our agenda. We do not have any attendees, so I'm assuming we're not going to get any public comment right now. And then, as Annie mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we did receive email correspondence, which has been shared both with the consultant and all of the steering committee members.
Yep.
But if that is everything, then we will adjourn. And then you can email me or anyone from the consultant side directly if you have any questions.
Beautiful. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
you.
We're going.